society is built on hard, sound money, and in order to cooperate and collaborate, you need to have a measuring stick that you can trust, that's always going to be the same length. 21 million Bitcoin, you can measure everything in the world against that, and that is not going to change. And so that's like a huge advantage for Bitcoiners that the rest of the world just has not caught up to. And the biggest mistake you can possibly make today is not changing your denominator to Bitcoin. If you're measuring everything in the US dollar, the euro, any other cryptocurrency, you're doing it wrong, because Bitcoin is the signal.
So how's it going, man?
It's going really well. How are you doing, Walker?
I'm doing very well. This is my first interview, Bitcoin Talk episodes, as I'm calling them, of the new year, I believe. I think this is the first one, so you are my entrance back to the interview scene. So welcome.
Thank you. I mean, that's quite a bit of pressure. I'm hoping that we have a great conversation and it kicks off your 2024 on a positive note.
I'm sure that we will. And the beauty of, I started this show as actually a joke. I think it was at BitBlock Boom a couple of years ago, and a couple of us were like throwing around the idea that, there just aren't enough Bitcoin podcasts. And this was, I think, 2022. So wow, we've really grown the Bitcoin podcast games since then. But I was like, I'm going to start another fucking Bitcoin podcast, and that's literally going to be the title. And then like a year after that, I was like, maybe I should actually do it, but take it somewhat seriously. So I still got the domain anotherfuckingbitcoinpodcast.com and like titcoin.org and things like that. But then I was like, okay, I'll just have them redirect to bitcoinpodcast.net, and it'll be very official and super serious. But my point being that this is a low pressure environment. So
that's great.
All bets are off here.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little intimidated also by just the opportunity to join the Bitcoin podcast. I mean, there are a lot of Bitcoin podcasts out there, but there's only one the Bitcoin podcast.
I know, and as soon as you put the in front of something, it makes it official. And so I figured, wow, nobody else has taken, just got to capitalize the word the, and it becomes the. And so, hey, why not just fill that gap?
Podcasts, not products. That's what I always say.
Why build products when you can build podcasts? The real value add in the Bitcoin community, Bitcoiners talking to each other.
Love it. But hey, that's how this whole thing started, though. BitcoinTalk.org. Without BitcoinTalk.org, we wouldn't have any products or podcasts, and Bitcoin would just be a little niche cypherpunk mailing list experiment. And now we've got Larry Fink shilling Bitcoin on all the major news.
It is kind of a trip. I mean, you've been in the space a lot longer than I have. I think very obviously. I'm only my first like Bitcoin cycle was basically this cycle. Like I had bought Litecoin at I think the 2017 top, because I was one of those people who thought, well, I can't afford a whole Bitcoin. I'll just get one of these Litecoins, and maybe someday it'll be worth what Bitcoin's worth. Obviously very stupid in retrospect, but then saw things crash and came back a couple of years later at like the end of 2019, and I was like, what's this Bitcoin thing again? And to be fair, the first time I heard about it was I think 2014 or 2015. It was the Silk Road days, because I had a friend who was procuring some things that he wanted from an open website, which should not be a crime either for the person procuring them or for the person who built that website. But it's one of those things where it took me a few touch points to get to it. And then finally it was like 2020, they shut us all down. They started printing money. And I was like, I need to understand what the fuck money is a little bit better. And then through that, just started viewing it through the lens of Bitcoin. And then you know how it is. It's like the rabbit hole is a one-way street. And so once you go down it, you're like, well, I'm hooked, and there is literally no going back for me anymore.
That's right. And I think what you just mentioned really highlights the effectiveness of a lot of the altcoin marketing strategy, where it just is out there. They're all out there trying to get people's attention away from Bitcoin, which is the innovation. And I myself fell for it when I first got into Bitcoin. I was doing my research, and I decided, hey, I want to get some of this Bitcoin stuff. Sounds interesting. Now, I'm a smart guy, so I'm going to get Bitcoin, and then what's the other crypto that is a little bit more buttoned up, a little bit more professional? Oh, it's the banker's crypto, Ripple. So I ended up buying some Bitcoin. I bought some Ripple. Ripple essentially went to zero for a few years, and then magically, kind of unfortunately, revived in 2017. And that was the end of my shitcoin journey. And I converted all that to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I bought, I don't even know how many, different types of shitcoins before then realizing, hold on, this is a fool's errand, and I am not a super genius trader. And even if I was, I don't think that it's worth my time to be investing my money, but also my time in trying to watch these things, looking for the next, 100x gem that you're going to find. It's like, because realistically, unless you're an insider, you're going to get burned. And if you are an insider, I don't know how you really sleep at night very well, knowing that you're just making these gains on the backs of other people getting rugged. It just doesn't quite sit right. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners have gone through that journey where it's like, I'm not trying to play the moral high ground, but I just think what you're doing is garbage, and how garbage people act. And I would rather try to build something of value, for myself, for my family, for society, that other people find valuable and will pay me for, rather than, print up a token, run a slick marketing campaign, pump it to all high heavens, and then rug it out to make a nice profit and rinse and repeat. Like, it just, I guess if you sleep well at night, then good for you. But I think for most of us who are far down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, that's not even something that we can comprehend anymore.
It's so funny when I tell people that I work in Bitcoin, they think that I'm some sort of crypto trader. And I am the worst trader ever. I tried trading for, a grand total of like a week, and I ended up losing a bunch of money. I just said never again. And since that time, all I've done is essentially just save in Bitcoin, and that's outperformed really anything else. And so I always tell people, they're like, oh my gosh, you've been in Bitcoin for a long time. You must, be great at trading and all this stuff. It's like, no, I just like earn money, and then I park some of that money in Bitcoin for the long term.
It's like this insane concept that you can just work and earn money and then have a savings vehicle that is reliable over the long term. And you're not going to touch it, so you don't care about the day-to-day fluctuations. But over the long span of years, oh wow, your purchasing power increased dramatically. But it's like, all it is just back to basics. Like, that's what Bitcoin is, right? It's just being able to save. And I was somebody who was not great at saving prior to Bitcoin. I was making a good amount of money. I was working at Accenture for a number of years. So I made, very good money, but just somehow just always spent so very much of that money. And it wasn't until Bitcoin that I realized, oh, this is just, I use this as my savings technology. And it's really simple once you change your outlook to view like, Bitcoin is how I save, and I want to save as much as I can while still, like, I'm not living in a box, I'm sitting in a chair. So like, sure, I've got some fiat things like this chair that I'm sitting on. I could be standing right now, sure. But it's this mindset shift, and it's like, that's a really nice thing, because when you have that simplicity of how you're actually going to store the value of your time and your energy, then it becomes much easier to focus on things that do actually create value versus just figuring out how you're trying to scrape by or looking for the next, 100x crypto gem that you're going to make it all back in one trade with, which is never going to happen. But yeah, I'm curious what you think, being in this space for longer than I've been, seeing a few cycles, do you think that there's a point that we reach where, every Bitcoin bull market, it seems, there's a new shitcoin du jour, or a new bunch of shitcoins, that are the hot flavor of the day. Last time it was a lot of dogs. Maybe this time it's like lizards and cats. I don't know. Do you think there's a point that we reach either sooner or later where that stops being the case, like where the value prop of shitcoins just becomes so untenable and more people become aware of it and stop conflating it with Bitcoin, that we stop seeing those same, follow-on hype cycles with crypto? Or is it just something that's going to always be a tag along to Bitcoin? What do you think on that?
Well, I've been extremely surprised at how long the general crypto garbage has persisted. I originally thought, it was very clear, early to me at least, that Bitcoin was the real innovation. Bitcoin was the one that discovered or solved the problem of digital scarcity. And all of these cryptos are just examples of the fact that it is super easy to make digital copies of things. You can make infinite digital copies of anything except for Bitcoin. That's kind of the innovation in my mind of Bitcoin, is it's the thing that solved that problem. So I thought that people were going to catch on to that a lot quicker, but that I was totally wrong. And what I think is really fascinating, and I think I've been through maybe 2 or 3 bull markets. Like this will be my third, I think, full cycle. Is not that the shitcoins have gone away, but their narrative just keeps changing. Like it's all the same garbage, but under a different marketing umbrella. So now it's, I think right now it's kind of embarrassing to talk about NFTs in the broader market. Like there's still some diehard NFTers out there, but most people have recognized that was a total fad. But there are still some persistent altcoins out there that have just scraped by on these different narratives, and I think maybe primarily just lots of funding and the fact that they have a lot of wealth. The other thing that's kind of unfortunate about the whole crypto scene that outside of Bitcoin is that altcoins have been one of the most lucrative ways to earn Bitcoin over the last 6 years. So things like the Tron Foundation and Block One. So Tron, is a shitcoin. Block One launched EOS. They are massive, massive holders of Bitcoin, and they probably will be for not forever, but for the foreseeable future. So there's a world where, the Tron Foundation is helping to establish schools in, rural Africa or something. And it's just like, all they did was capture people's value instead of creating something that was useful for the world. But I'm hoping to see, in the future that they at least put that Bitcoin to good use, or alternatively, maybe just spend it. What was nice about the last cycle is we saw a lot of large, kind of not great Bitcoin holders lose or spend all of their Bitcoin. And I'm thinking about like the Terra Luna Foundation, FTX, although in FTX's case, that was their client's Bitcoin that they had taken. But like, it's heartening to see that a lot of these kind of iffy companies and holders are spending their Bitcoin. That's just the process of Bitcoin decentralizing, and it's a little bit painful, but overall it's healthy.
Yeah, I always think it's such a clear signal that, what you mentioned, Tron or EOS, these whatever you want to call them, companies, foundations, whatever label you want to give them, because they're not a decentralized cryptocurrencies, certainly. They're
of course
platforms. The fact that they are taking their native token and using the proceeds from the sale of that token to then buy Bitcoin should tell you all you need to know about where the true value is. They're not trying to buy back as much of their own token as they can. No, they're selling a token to be able to accumulate Bitcoin, which is the hard money, which again should be clear as day to most folks. But, I think for a lot of people, myself included, like it takes a little bit of pain to realize why Bitcoin is special and why it is different. But that journey takes different amounts of time for different people, I think, and incentives matter. And so if you're on the inside of one of these crypto companies, you may think, well, maybe you convince yourself like, yeah, we really are the future of finance. And yeah, we're using the sales of this to buy Bitcoin, but we're accompanying Bitcoin along on this journey. But we're where the real innovation is, the real use case, utility, whatever, blockchain technology buzzwords you want to throw out there. But I want to back up a little bit before we get too deep down the shitcoin rabbit hole.
Oh, it's deep.
It is deep and dark.
Let's not go there.
But I want to start out with just doing a little introduction to you. And I found that the best way to do this is just to ask a question. And that question is, can you just tell everyone in your own words, who are you and how did you get here today to where you are doing what you do?
My name is Phil Geiger. I work at Unchained leading our product marketing initiatives, and I've been a Bitcoiner since kind of the end of 2014. And my journey to discovering Bitcoin it was a little bit luck. It was a lot of luck. Let's be honest. I was in the right place at the right time. I had the right background, but I also think it was partially how I was raised and the things that influenced me through my life. So I studied economics in undergrad, and even before that, I was introduced to what I didn't realize but the Austrian School of Economics through books written by Ayn Rand before college. And after going to school for a Keynesian economics degree, I was feeling very burnt out. I was really interested in like economics, psychology, trying to understand how people interact with the world, and the economics that I learned at the university just really didn't teach me that. So I left university and started working in healthcare for a health tech company, implementing software at major hospitals around the country and around the world. So I was really primed to understand Bitcoin when I first heard about it in like a presentation format. I'd heard about it, from the news or from articles that I'd read that telling me that it was evil. But I was just in the right place at the right time in 2014, listened to a presentation given by a woman in Madison, Wisconsin, and it walked through the history of money, and it talked about the technical side of it as well as the economic side of it, and it just resonated with me. So immediately after that, I just decided that I had to get some.
Wow. Were you working at Epic by chance in Madison?
I was, yeah. I did 7 years working at Epic, and lived in Wisconsin, for 5 years.
Nice. I know that Epic is like one of the largest employers in the Madison area, so I figured that was a pretty good shot.
Yeah, you throw a rock in Madison and you'll hit somebody who works at Epic if they're in their 20s.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate the background, and it's interesting, honestly, that you were down the Keynesian path. And was there a point where, or when you were in college, as you were studying, that you realized, like, given that you had a little bit of the Austrian background pre-college, that you realized, you know what, some of this stuff just doesn't check out? Like some of this, I can't square this circle of these concepts they're trying to teach me?
The entire time.
Okay.
I remember doing homework, and it was essentially just running some calculations and drawing graphs based off the calculations. And I was just thinking, like, what am I doing here? Why am I drawing these graphs? What do these, variables represent? Why am I ignoring like other variables? I actually found myself a lot more drawn towards psychology as a result, because that's what I was really trying to get at, is like trying to understand how people interact with each other and society, and how civilization kind of grows. And so, yeah, the economics that I learned in school, I just thought was a complete waste of time. I couldn't focus on it at all. It just didn't make any sense to me, but I felt as though I needed to complete the degree because I already had like half the classes done. So I did that, but that's why I left. I was like, I don't want to be involved with this. And then, a few years into my career in health tech, I discovered Bitcoin and the Austrian school. And I was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. And what's nice about the Austrian school is it really does a good job of talking about individuals and how they act and how they collaborate and cooperate, and how from the individual an entire society functions. And this is something that in the mainstream media and just all the education that you get in like a normal public school today is completely hidden. Like it really tries to hide individual actions and educate people about just like how the state controls the money and this is how it works, and then everything is good. And if we don't have that happening, then society is going to collapse. And as Bitcoiners have come to understand, no, wait, actually the opposite is totally true. Like society is built on hard, sound money, and in order to cooperate and collaborate, you need to have a measuring stick that you can trust, that's always going to be the same length. 21 million Bitcoin, you can measure everything in the world against that, and that is not going to change. And so that's like a huge advantage for Bitcoiners that the rest of the world just has not caught up to, and it's something that you can. We were talking a little bit about the shitcoin rabbit hole. Like the biggest mistake you can possibly make today is not changing your denominator to Bitcoin. If you're measuring everything in the US dollar, the euro, any other cryptocurrency, you're doing it wrong, because Bitcoin is the signal. And outperforming Bitcoin is nearly impossible at this point. I mean, there's a few cases where you can, over a short period of time, outperform Bitcoin. But over the long run, it's extremely challenging. And so one of the biggest competitive advantages you can have is just, start measuring your net worth in Bitcoin and see if that additional rental property is actually worth purchasing, or your fourth jet ski is really going to make you that much happier. Holding Bitcoin for a little bit longer will allow you to get a fleet of jet skis.
Right. And you can buy the jet ski factory in a few halving cycles.
Manufacture jet skis.
Yeah, it is funny because it is such a mentality shift, and it's one that I'm so grateful to have made, where you start having that as, again, your measuring stick. And it is the only measuring stick you can use, Bitcoin, because it's the only measuring stick that's not constantly changing at the whims of some group of old farts behind closed doors. And so you actually have a measuring stick that is going to, give you accurate measurements over the long period of time, without needing to worry that, I got a whatever percent raise this year, but inflation was 5% this year, but it was 3% last. You can't possibly, it is so hard to run a business in this fiat inflationary environment where, honestly, workers are the most disadvantaged, because, and I think Lynn Alden makes this argument quite often, that, inflation's 10%, and you go to your boss and you say, I need a 10% raise. And they say, well, did you get 10% more productive? And no, I got 1% more productive, but, an extra 9% for inflation. So it's so difficult, but it's difficult on the business side, on the producer's side as well, because you're having to deal with constantly changing input costs, constantly changing employment costs. And it's so hard when you have to spend so much of your time worrying about just the fluctuating value of your purchasing power as a business and what that's going to get you. And then on an individual level, once you make that mentality shift to say, Bitcoin is my measuring stick, I may have other assets, but I need to measure them in Bitcoin. Otherwise, I won't know if they're actually good investments or not. It kind of opens your eyes, and you're like, oh, okay, these things that I thought maybe, this particular stock in my portfolio that is doing whatever return a year, but it's paying me a little bit of a dividend. But you know what? It's still just treading water with inflation when it comes down to it. And in Bitcoin terms, it's dropping. Maybe not over 1 year, if it happens to be a bearish year, but again, as you said, over the long run. And I think just at a larger sense, you touched on with, let's say, traditional economics, Keynesian economics, what's taught in school, this idea that so much of it is this backwards-looking analysis, trying to be able to plot out and create equations for the results, and to fit those equations to the results that they tell the story that you want them to tell. it's not at all, versus the Austrian perspective, which is okay, based on human action, that we all make decisions that are in our best interest in order to try and accumulate capital and create value. And it just couldn't be a more diametrically opposed set of ideas. And, it just makes me think of Paul Krugman. The guy has been running these victory. I don't know if he's one of those people I have on notifications on Twitter, on X, excuse me, because I just love to see it. And I mean, especially these past few weeks, he's just repeatedly been like, the war against inflation is over. We won. We're back to practically 2% levels. If we measure using, cough, cough, this basket of CPI goods, and we're going to use super core for this month. We're not going to use core. Next month, we'll use core inflation. We'll take out the food and the energy and the housing and the used cars and things like that. And now look at this. The Fed did it. We are the smartest guys in the room, and we figured it all out. We figured out how to make the market perfect. And all you have to do is just change the amount of money you print from year to year. And this backwards looking justification for policies dutifully puppeted by mouthpieces like Paul Krugman, like I want to know what he gets out of this. Like, who is paying a guy like that at this point? Because it's just so obvious that he's a blatant regime shill, and it will say whatever he needs to make it seem like everything is great. And, when the anointed are in power, Paul Krugman says, well, look, everything, we figured it out, guys. There's no reason. Why are you complaining about the economy? The economy is great. Inflation is back to our target of 2% theft per year. It's just astounding. Like, I don't know. He blows my mind on a daily basis.
I started thinking about Krugman and MMTers less as economists, because they're not economists, and more as fantasy romance authors. And it actually makes a lot more sense. Like, in Krugman's fantasy romance novel, the guys in the suits change their numbers, they update their CPIs, and it creates this utopia. And that is a fantasy, and it's not reality. And I mean, I think it's one of the funniest books that I've read over the last 4 years was The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. She's an
I haven't read it yet. I've been trying to bring myself to read it. So what's your analysis of, for those that don't know, Stephanie Kelton is one of the premier MMT thinkers out there.
Yeah,
so how did you find
thinkers is a little bit of a of a loaded term there. I would say like anti-thinker. Like she takes a look at, she tries to describe how the economy functions, starting from the foundation where money is only valuable because the government makes it valuable. And if you believe that fantasy, then her arguments might be compelling, but it's just factually incorrect. It's not how, starting from this idea where money is only valuable because the government taxes you in that form of money is like such a provably false assumption that I don't even know what to say. Like, if you believe that, then the MMT, econstrology might make sense, but it's just not how the real world works. And they get really upset when you point out that that's not how the real world works, because, gold still has value and the government doesn't collect taxes in gold.
It's just to be ignorant of literally all of history. Like, it's literally to say, like, history doesn't matter at all. The fact that emergent monies have existed and still exist, like gold, doesn't matter at all. We're now saying that the only way money can have value is if it is backed by the threat of violence and force, because that's implicitly or sometimes explicitly what they're saying, right? If you're saying that the only reason that money has value is because government says so and they collect taxes, that is implicitly saying that the only reason money has value is because if you don't use it, we will put you in jail, because that means you're not paying your taxes and you will go to jail. And if you don't believe that the government will put you in jail for not paying taxes, I don't know what to tell you. They will. They will confiscate everything you have and they will put you in jail. But
Yeah.
I know there are some other MMTers who are a little bit more explicit with that, almost gleefully saying like, well, yeah, that's how it works. You know, the government will use force if they need to, and that's why this has value, because there's force behind it.
The problem with all of it is that Bitcoin can't exist for any of those things to be true. And the fact that Bitcoin exists just falsifies all of it. And they have no response to that other than to say that it's, you know, Bitcoin's just for speculating, or it's just for criminals, or it's not backed by anything. It has no intrinsic value. You might have heard all of these terms. Like, those aren't real arguments. They're just kind of like name calling, because their entire worldview has been shattered by the introduction of neutral money that can't be debased.
I mean, it's really quite a neo-communist mentality when it comes down to it. It's basically saying that the only way something can have value is if it is centrally controlled. If it is issued by the all-knowing and ever-present omniscient state. And if you don't use it, well, you'll find out what happens and you won't like it. And I find that to also just be such an inherently like anti-freedom mentality. And I think that that's also part of the problem, is that, you know, oftentimes, like, especially, you know, you're scrolling through X and the algorithm shows you just some absolutely fucking stupid take from someone, and you're like, I know this is stupid and I really shouldn't even engage with it. Like, I shouldn't even waste my time with it, but you're like, oh fuck, I need to. And then if you start getting into conversations with these people through the limited information exchange medium of social media, you realize that, like, oh, it's not even just that we disagree about what is money and what properties money has and how money should work, but we disagree just so fundamentally on, like, what are people's, what are their base rights, what are their base needs, what drives people. And this idea that you can justify the institutionalized theft of purchasing power from people by saying that, well, this is just how it works, and it's the only way that money can work. And you know what, buddy, you better just like it and go back to being a cog in the wheel and stop complaining and just invest more wisely. You know, then you'll keep your purchasing power. Just invest better. And, you know, that, and to claim that that's in any way a capitalistic mentality is just backwards. And I don't know, I'm curious to see, because we've seen a lot of the starts of some narrative shifts around Bitcoin, right? Like, I think we've seen a little bit of the narrative start to shift, actually quite a lot, regarding different pieces of Bitcoin FUD, like the Bitcoin burns the planet. Like, that is starting to become an untenable argument to make, because you just look stupid when you make it, because now there is so much data coming out. Like, before, it was basically just everybody republishing Digiconomist pieces, and from that Dutch central banker, Alex de Vries or whatever it is, and everybody, you know, putting that as their trusted source in all of their hit pieces. But now it's like you have more peer-reviewed academic studies coming out, because that's the only thing the legacy mind listens to, saying that, like, no, actually, look, Bitcoin is helping people in Africa to pay for their renewable energy mini grids and electrify these villages. And you have, like, oh, look, you can use Bitcoin miners on top of a flared gas well. Like, wow, that would otherwise just be burned into the atmosphere. This is actually kind of nice. So it's becoming harder to have that argument that Bitcoin burns the planet, because now it's just becoming clearer to even more people that you're just lying. Like, you're just making that up. So I'm curious to where you see the attack vectors coming.
Last year we learned that Bitcoin isn't burning the planet. It's just using all the water.
That's right. So the swimming pools. Yes.
That's right. He uses, in the course of 1 month, it will use up enough water to fill all of the swimming pools in the U.S. And you can just tell whenever someone sends a Bitcoin transaction, because all of the lakes and rivers nearby just go dry.
It is truly astounding what they come up with for this. It's like, wow.
Amazing.
every time you send a Bitcoin transaction, you just drain a swimming pool. Like that's just how it works.
Well, they're not sending their best, which is why Bitcoin has absolutely wiped the floor with every single global currency since its existence. If you, again, reframe your mind, if you start measuring everything with Bitcoin as the denominator, what you realize is that they have been absolutely demolished over the last 15 years. And the people who don't have Bitcoin, who haven't been saving in it and preserving their purchasing power and really increasing their purchasing power, they're slowly getting, their voices are getting drowned out and less effective because the Bitcoiners are comparatively getting so much wealthier. It's even, you know, I noticed the other day, I think it was some news article about either Malay or one of the other central banks around the world, like devaluing their currency to match the black market rate. Like even that is propaganda. The black market has figured out what the actual exchange rate of a given currency is, and the governments have been totally lying about the exchange rates, probably to fleece tourists and their own population, their own employees. And now they're just matching the exchange rate with what it actually is. They're not lying anymore, but the articles are like, you know, Malay devalues the Argentinian peso. It's like, what?
It's like, no. The peso has been screwed by the central banks and the corrupt politicians in Argentina for a long time. Malay just reflected what the free market is actually telling you the exchange rate of that peso is.
Exactly.
Which is honestly a brilliant move on his part. Like, okay, like I'll devalue it too to what the real rate is, because that's going to cast even more light on it, because you can't just hide behind the government numbers when the government numbers actually tell the truth for once. Like, what a shocking concept. It's interesting. I'm curious, so we talk about the energy FUD narrative, and I do think that one is going to die down. We'll still get plenty of, I'm sure, old Alex DeVries will still be around for a while, still kicking up the same old tired arguments. But I have to imagine that the attack vectors are going to shift this cycle. And it seems that they're shifting towards honestly, like the oldest trope of all, which is Bitcoin is used by criminals. Like that's the one that they're really, Elizabeth Warren is really pounding her chest on. And I'm curious what you see as, like, is that the big attack vector of this cycle? Is that the big FUD vector? Is it something else? Do we reach a point where the attack vector is like, you know what? These Bitcoiners have too much wealth, and we need a windfall tax just for Bitcoiners because, it's unfair and we should redistribute some of that wealth because they were just speculating and they got lucky and whatever else. What do you think?
I actually think that this is where the ETFs are going to provide a lot of cover for us, because Elizabeth Warren can write however many angry emails and letters she wants, but when BlackRock, which has enough, I think BlackRock's AUM is something like $8.3 trillion, which is something around 3 times the annual GDP of Germany. Like BlackRock has so much wealth that they get to make the rules. In the fiat system, those with the gold make the rules. That's what's very different about Bitcoin is it doesn't matter how much Bitcoin you have, you're still not going to change the supply. You're not going to increase the block size without all of the Bitcoin participants going along with that. So having these ETFs is just kind of shoved down Wall Street's throats is actually a really important development. And I do think I'm having a hard time putting my finger on what the exact FUD of this cycle is going to be. Even the Elizabeth Warren terrorist, claims were easily debunked publicly multiple times by different people, and it's starting to just make those politicians that are making those claims look very ignorant or just straight up purchased, which is probably both. They're probably both true. But yeah, I think I'd be interested. I'm interested in seeing how 2024 goes in terms of like the U.S. presidential elections, because I'm almost certain that Bitcoin is going to come up as a primary topic of debate, and we will get to see what both sides are saying. I would be shocked if they both kind of just agree about it, because I think that there's going to be deep pockets that are trying to purchase a specific narrative from each of them. But that's where I think, we'll really see the FUD come out is this year on the political stage in the US.
I want to remind you that the Bitcoin halving is just a few months away. So now is a very good time to get your Bitcoin off the exchange and into your own custody. Go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker for 5% off the Bitcoin-only BitBox02 hardware wallet. It is fully open source. You can go to their GitHub and verify for yourself. No need to trust me. It's also super easy to set up, and that makes it a great tool for seasoned psychopaths and new Bitcoiners alike. When you go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use that promo code Walker, not only do you get 5% off, but you also help support this show, another fucking Bitcoin podcast. So thank you. It's going to be a wild year in general, because I think this 2024 is the year of, 49% of the world that is of voting age will be voting in a national election in 2024. It's like the most elections happening at the same time at any point in history.
Wow.
So, which is just kind of wild when you think about it. Like basically half the world is going to be voting for a change in power at the highest levels of whatever their government is. And obviously the US is, the biggest bully at the playground. But even you look at Malay in Argentina, that's a seismic shift and a really positive one for the people of Argentina, I think. And, time will tell, but so far it seems so. Judging by the speech, I don't know how they let him give this speech at Davos, but I don't know if you watched the speech he gave there. Incredible. Probably the best Davos speech that's ever happened, but the bar is pretty low there because it's usually just John Kerry telling you, before he gets back in his private jet that, you need to stop eating meat.
Or the author of Sapiens talking about the collective hallucination of society and how it's all just a dream and everything is fake.
Oh my, what's it? Yuval Harari or something like that.
That was another fantasy romance novel, by the way. I don't know if you read that one.
I did. I read that back before I was orange pilled, and at the time I was like, wow, this guy has some interesting points, and wow, and he writes in that way that appeals to somebody like myself at the time who had kind of a Dunning-Kruger effect where I thought I knew more than I did. And he sounds smart. He sounds like he's saying things that are really intelligent.
Yeah,
but it's really just a lot of bullshit.
And he weaves in a lot of truths with some very, very sneaky lies.
Yeah.
And that's why it's such a dangerous book, I think, because it's like, it's really readable. It's great. It's very fascinating. And then he'll say something and you're like, wait, what?
He had that speech recently where he was like, nobody has any rights at all. Like not even to your own body. And it's like,
rights are a fiction.
Yeah. Ooh. I'm pretty sure you could at least say that I have the right to my own body. And if you don't believe that, that's pretty much just the justification that's been used for slavery and genocide by every person throughout history. So is that really the side you want to be arguing on? But I don't know. It's going to be an interesting year. And I hope that we see Bitcoin discussed on the ballot across a ton of countries. And I think we will, because it was really cool to see both RFK and Vivek. They both announced that they were accepting Bitcoin donations via Lightning at a Bitcoin conference this last year. That was awesome to see, and to have them bringing that into the presidential race conversation, shifting that Overton window. I don't know what RFK's reasonable chances are. I think an RFK Vivek ticket just really mixed things up. That would be a game changer, but probably Vivek's gunning for that VP spot for Trump, but we'll see. But the conversation is shifting, and it's shifting very, very palpably. And sadly, I think it's probably going to come down to Trump and Biden again, and RFK running as an independent. And likely they're just going to have diametrically opposed positions to each other regarding Bitcoin. If they talk about Bitcoin at all, Biden hasn't really spoken about it that much, but I don't think his handlers just haven't told him to say anything. Trump has spoken negatively in the past. Maybe his opinions changed. And then he's also launched multiple NFT collections. So like take that as you will. I don't know. I hope they talk about it.
Yeah, I think it would be a massive competitive advantage to pose the question politically. Like, I think whoever poses the question politically is going to do well, because it's funny. Money is supposed to be apolitical. It's not supposed to be a political issue, but having an apolitical money might be one of the most political things that we could possibly have right now. That's just the kind of clown politics world we live in, where something that is definitionally apolitical, Bitcoin, nobody can really change it on their own, is turned into like a political weapon. But I do think it would be a very powerful one, and definitely controversial and attention grabbing, which for a lot of these politicians is really important. You want to say things that are going to capture attention.
Yeah, I mean, I have to wonder if half the reason that somebody like Elizabeth Warren even tweets about Bitcoin, or her staff tweets on her behalf about Bitcoin, is just because it's the highest engagement that she gets on any post. You know, any
Absolutely.
Publicity is good publicity, right? Like, she knows that they get more website hits and more attention, and her name is published in more places. And so they're like, well, even if people are saying bad stuff, at least they're talking about us. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm totally guilty of being completely baited by the nonsense. But yes, that's 100%. I mean, it's the Peter Schiff playbook. Like, he's been dunking on Bitcoin for years, 7 years or something? And Bitcoin has gone from hundreds of dollars to $70,000, and now it's, $40-something thousand dollars after the ETFs. There are ETFs. Like, the guy is so obviously, he's been wrong for so long. He's essentially built a career off of it. But he triggers the Bitcoiners so effectively that his social media scores are, astronomical. He gets an unbelievable amount of engagement, which is kind of one of the broken incentives of social media today. You have to say things that are controversial.
It's so true. And I mean, it's Peter Schiff, I have to wonder, maybe he's just playing a long game, trying to suppress that price, as much as he can, because really he's trying to fill his own bags with Bitcoin, because he's like, shit, guys, I get it now, but I can't let anyone know I've get it. That's going to get all my gold bugs to start buying. But
well, he's even admitted to losing his Bitcoin key, So the guy has Bitcoin. They all do. All the shitcoiners have Bitcoin. It's like the number one rule.
And to clarify, we're also calling gold a shitcoin here.
Yeah, gold has served its purpose throughout the last 5,000 years as the best form of money available, until a perfect form of money was created in the form of Bitcoin. Bitcoin solves all the problems of gold, its physicality, divisibility, and it also solves all the problems of the digital dollar, which is that it can't be inflated. So you can send Bitcoin around the world just like you can send a digital dollar around the world, and you can't send gold around the world. And it's not going to be debased. It also doesn't centralize because it's not physical. So it really is the best of both worlds.
On that topic, you gave a talk or a short presentation at Bitcoin Commons. I was just watching the video talking about basically why Bitcoin has that cap of 21 million and or more so, why that cap will remain and how it remains. Can you touch on that a little bit? Because I think I really enjoyed that talk, watching it. You explained it really well and really simply.
Thank you.
And I think that's something that always, especially for people who are just learning about Bitcoin, they often say, well, sure, the supply is fixed now, but they don't understand the game theory of why it will remain so. And it's a tough nut to crack for a lot of people. Can you dig into that a little bit based on that talk you gave?
I'll do my best. And just for background for your audience, at the Bitcoin Commons here in Austin, Texas, we earlier this month, or I guess last month now, in January of 2024, we hosted an event called Bitcoin for Local Businesses, where we invited local entrepreneurs into the Commons and just gave them a few kind of Bitcoin 101 presentations, and then followed it up with how businesses are helping other businesses purchase, secure, and manage and grow their Bitcoin. And I was tasked with giving the presentation how Bitcoin enforces its fixed supply in about 15 minutes to a group of people who I was assuming just knew absolutely nothing about Bitcoin, or just very surface level. And so, as I even mentioned in the talk, like the subject of how Bitcoin enforces its fixed supply is extremely difficult to pin down. And so I was just trying to like get people thinking about it in the right way. So much of the time is spent on miners or nodes, the technology, the real world energy expenditure. But my presentation was really about how the individual is what enforces the fixed supply of 21 million. So you, Walker, me, I enforce the fixed supply of 21 million of my Bitcoin, right? And if someone else tries to change that and I don't like it, I can take that copy that is created and convert it into Bitcoin. Now, I'm not always going to be right, but what I will never personally vote for is for my Bitcoin to be debased. And there's ways that I can help to support the network beyond just selling a copy. You can run a full node, which is running the Bitcoin software, which is very easy to download. You can run it on any sort of computer essentially today. You can also mine Bitcoin, right? That helps to process transactions and ties Bitcoin to the real world via energy expenditure. But neither of those things alone are what secure the supply of 21 million. It's really the Bitcoin participants, people who save in Bitcoin and who don't allow for a copy of Bitcoin to just exist. So the example I gave was the 2017 Bitcoin Cash hard fork, which was a really interesting example because it really had nothing to do with the supply. It was about a totally different piece of functionality, the block size. The Bitcoin cashers wanted a larger block size. The Bitcoin participants very clearly were not interested in that. But through the process of creating an entirely new cryptocurrency and giving that copy to the holders of Bitcoin, what they did in actuality was attempt to create inflation. So the market deemed their attempt as inflation, which is why it was sold to essentially zero. I think it crashed like 98%. And again, their intention was not to try to print money. It was to change something else that they were really passionate about. But the market viewed their actions as attempting to print money. And what I wanted to leave people with the presentation is that's probably not the only time that will ever happen. In fact, we can just assume that something like that can and will happen in the future, maybe via a bug we didn't expect, or another civil war where people want to change another aspect of Bitcoin. And people have even proposed just adding some tail inflation to Bitcoin. Sure, go for it. That's my perspective, because as soon as they attempt to do that, what I will do is sell that copy. And I can't predict what everyone else will do, but I feel very confident that the market will find their solution to be significantly inferior and will send it to close to zero. Now, Bitcoin Cash is still alive, so I have to give them some credit.
Barely.
It's hanging in there. Again, if you're measuring the value of something with Bitcoin as a denominator, it looks like it's been absolutely slaughtered. But if you're measuring it in the US dollar, it's still hanging in there. But it's essentially irrelevant, right? Nobody's making Bitcoin Cash ETFs. Nobody's really saving in Bitcoin Cash. It's got some kind of small community, but it's not really making much of an impact on the world, whereas Bitcoin continues to grow, and you can just tell by the values of these two networks. So anyways, just to recap, like the presentation was essentially trying to get people thinking about how they themselves in Bitcoin are really governing the monetary policy, and their actions and decisions are what enforce that supply of 21 million. And even if you don't even think about opting into Bitcoin because of its fixed supply, maybe you're just getting some Bitcoin because you think the price is going to rise, which is how most of us start. Unknowingly, what you're doing is opting into that fixed supply of 21 million and helping to enforce it. I think the things that oh, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, the things that I could have done better with the presentation is talk a little bit more about miners. Miners perform an extremely critical function in Bitcoin, but I think of it more as infrastructure or like plumbing, right? Like the world, civilization is like one plumbing accident away from the road or, some post-apocalyptic movie. It is absolutely critical, but plumbing is not what is like, not alone what is valuable about, civilization. And the same thing is true with mining. Like it is in a critical function that Bitcoin could not exist without, but they're not in charge of the network. It's not the miners that are delivering the value. That's almost like saying, fiat money is valuable because the government taxes it. It's like, no, you're performing an extremely valuable function. You're converting electricity into hashes in order to propose blocks of transactions. You're processing transactions, and Bitcoin doesn't run without that. But if you don't process transactions according to the rules that I'm following, or that you're following, or that consensus is following, you're just booted out of the network. That was the other really interesting thing about the Bitcoin Cash case study, was that they had a majority of the hash rate. Maybe not a majority, but a significant portion of the hash rate, and a lot of large businesses that were agreeing with that. And it just proved that, hey, it's not the hash rate, it's not the businesses, it's the users. The other thing that I'll say, and this is, I think, a little bit of an underexplored aspect of the Bitcoin Cash fork, is that there was a lot of debate about SegWit and how to activate it at the time. And an engineer, they went by the name Shaolin Fry, just took a copy of the software, Bitcoin Core, and released their own version, which had its own activation policy. And so they even went around the Bitcoin Core engineers and just launched a separate piece of software that gained enough traction that it kind of pulled people towards that activation method. So it's kind of funny. It's like that was a really, in my opinion, great example of just how much Bitcoin refuses to centralize, like in any way. Like miners couldn't do it, businesses couldn't do it, even the engineers, the Bitcoin Core engineers, I think were, now we can look back at it and say, hey, they were trying to do what was right, but what they were doing was actually stalling, and the market said, no, we want this thing activated now, and they kind of went around that whole process. It's just really interesting. That's I think if I was to do a longer presentation, I would go a little bit more into those details, but my presentation. I was
going to say, you only had 15 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's to a group of people who are not seasoned Bitcoin veterans. But I appreciate the explanation there, because I think what it touches on really is that fundamental game theory of Bitcoin, and also just the Austrian principle of human action. Like, people are going to do what is in their best interest. And with Bitcoin, if you are a holder of Bitcoin, it is in your best interest to maintain that fixed supply, to not add tail emissions. I think a lot of the tail emission suggestions tend to come from actually like the crypto side of things. These people that are suggesting, well, Bitcoin is they're the crypto guys who say that Bitcoin's a pet rock and that it doesn't do anything, and that it's going to have tail emissions, or it's just not going to work because there's not going to be enough revenue generated by fees, and miners will stop and hash rate will plummet, by the year 2140. Yep. Yeah. And Bitcoin will die yet again for the 5,000th time. But, on the fee side, like, we're seeing that that's just really not going to be an issue. And I find it a funny discussion to even have, because on the fee side, whenever people say that fees aren't going to be sufficient to support Bitcoin and to maintain that hash rate, it's kind of funny because talking about measuring sticks, they're using the measuring stick of the current fiat price of Bitcoin and then looking at how small, the fees may be and saying, well, see, that won't be enough to pay for energy. But you're measuring, again, in the wrong way. Like, you need to think about the fact that the value of those sats that are going to be generated by fees in the year 2100, in the year 2140, that's going to be an insane amount of value. And that's, again, going to be used to pay for electricity, which will still continue to seek out the cheapest possible sources and the, most, because they're the most profitable sources. And I think this, the overall scarcity discussion, it's a perfect segue into just the very obvious elephant in the room that everybody knows about and is entirely predictable, which is the Bitcoin halving, which is coming up in a couple of months, which I feel like with all of the ETF hype, it's like people have kind of put that in the back of their mind a little bit, and it's all been focused on the ETF side and saying, oh, well, the ETF is definitely not priced in right now. It's going to run like crazy after the ETFs go live. Well, it turns out the issuers were accumulating some Bitcoin leading up to the announcement, and then with Grayscale starting to basically get up to almost even, almost where it should be, and still having that, whatever it is, 1.5 management fee, people said, I'm getting out of this as fast as I can. And so that's a ton of sell pressure, right? We see that evaporating now. We see a lot of inflows happening. I think the ETF stuff overall is, like, everything's good for Bitcoin. And I think it's great that people have the ability to get exposure through alternate ways. And that being said, I think that every 4 year, every 210,000 blocks, I should say, almost about every 4 years, the halving is really going to be still the story of the year, like it is whenever there is a halving. And I think that it's going to be a very great case study, as it usually is, but probably taken to a higher degree this year. It's the unstoppable force, which is ever increasing demand, made even more intense by ETFs eating up more Bitcoin for their inflows, meeting that unstoppable force, meeting the immovable object. And that immovable object is that enforced by us, by the participants, hard cap of 21 million Bitcoin. And I don't think the halving is predictable entirely. But in your experience, is the halving ever entirely priced in? Because can you ever price in an exponential decrease in new supply? It is cutting it in half. And for people that aren't or haven't been around for a while, maybe they saw the last halving, or maybe they got in when Bitcoin was already running up to 69K. Maybe they've been buying since the top and DCAing in like psychopaths and are now actually in the black. But what are your thoughts going into this halving with the additional buy pressure of the ETFs? Like, there's a lot of talk about God candles, and I don't like to talk about price too much, but NGU is what draws the majority of people to Bitcoin, especially in the Western world, where we're not yet escaping a despotic regime that is shutting off our bank accounts, unless you're in Canada. But so far, we don't experience too much of that in the US. But what are your thoughts leading into the halving? How are you approaching it? How are you preparing for it?
Well, I'm preparing for it the same way that I've prepared for the last few halvings that I've experienced, and that is figuring out, first of all, which party I'm going to go to. So I think that the halvings, more than anything else, Satoshi really disrupted the party planning industry by baking in a party to the network. No, but on a serious note, like, Bitcoin's never priced in. Bitcoin for the last 15 years has not been priced in. It's my perspective that Bitcoin is the new global reserve currency, and it will, over time, eclipse and collapse all of the other currencies because it is a single neutral global currency that everyone in the world can use. Now that's going to take a lot of time. So Bitcoin has never been priced in. The knowledge distribution of the disruption is starting to like get a little bit wider in, you know, the US, for example, but there's still a very, 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 very long ways to go. Most people who have some exposure to Bitcoin have, I don't know, it's kind of like safe right now for people to say like, oh yeah, you should have 1 to 5% of your net worth in Bitcoin. Now, the most diehard Bitcoiners might have 80, 90 plus % of their wealth in Bitcoin. And it's my perspective that most of the world is going to get to that point at some point. So Bitcoin is never priced in. The halvings are a great marketing event for Bitcoin because it is just showing the world consistently every 4 years, this thing gets cut in half. Now, you know, what the price is going to do, I have no clue, but I view the halvings as just like a fun kind of more marketing event than like a truly important economic event, because the Bitcoin nodes in the software, it is already dictated the exact monetary policy. So it's my perspective that all 21 million Bitcoin already exist. Like they existed as soon as 2009, and they're just being issued, released on a schedule according to the plan. So yeah, I think that's it's always a great event, and I'm very excited about the halvings, and I celebrate it personally. But I think, you know, after another halving or two, it won't cause so much economic difference because people are just going to understand that that's how Bitcoin works. There's 21 million Bitcoin. They're released on a schedule. Every 4 years, the number that gets issued is cut in half. I think that's the one of the biggest problems too of people who think like, oh, well, you know, what about when the last Bitcoin is issued? What's going to be the incentive to mine Bitcoin? We were kind of talking about that a little bit earlier. They're thinking about Bitcoin mining as its own industry, when it's my perspective that Bitcoin mining is actually a tool of the energy production industry, and humans are never going to be 100% efficient at producing the exact right amount of energy at a given moment in time to be demanded by people. And having this network where, regardless of what time it is, where you are in the world, if you've produced too much energy, you can just monetize it. That is incredibly valuable, because right now, if you're an energy producer, if you produce too much energy and you don't have any Bitcoin miners, you have to turn off production. So you're losing money. And essentially any amount of value above zero, or even breaking even at zero, is better than losing money. So that Bitcoin mining, in my view, is just more of a tool of energy production, and it's one of the most important tools of energy production. I think that's another narrative shift that I've really noticed is over the last maybe year and a half or 2 years, that conversation has really shifted. Like, most energy companies are starting to think about what their Bitcoin strategy is, or Bitcoin miners are getting closer to these large energy companies and trying to work with them. I think ultimately the industry just becomes vertically integrated. It's just, again, another tool that energy producers will start to leverage. But today, you know, the Bitcoin miners are out there doing a lot of great work educating energy producers and, you know, acting as demand response here in Texas, for example, when it gets too cold or too hot.
I think that it's so funny because Bitcoin's one of those things that in retrospect, it's obvious, right? Like it's so obvious. You're like, okay, wait, there's 21 million coins every 4 years. I'm of the same opinion as you that all the Bitcoins already exist. They're just being issued according to the schedule. And every 4 years, we get closer and closer, asymptotically approaching 21 million. You know, never going to quite get there because we're still cutting in half, right? But for our purposes, 21 million. And you're like, oh, once you get that, it's like, well, yeah, it's really obvious what's happening next. And then you factor in the Bitcoin mining side of the equation, like you said, and I agree, we're going to see just trends towards vertical integration. I mean, I think Exxon was the first major energy company to start mining Bitcoin with flared gas. They started a pilot program in maybe 2020, 2021. I don't know the status of that pilot program right now, if it's turned into more of a full-fledged operation. But like you said, in Texas, with ERCOT and the demand response, this is an incredible tool. And Alex Gladstein had a fantastic piece for Bitcoin Magazine last week, I think, called Stranded, and it's all about Africa and Africa's Bitcoin adoption. But the first part of the piece focuses on Bitcoin mining in Malawi. And one of his key points is it's just becoming so clear that if you are not mining Bitcoin as part of your energy generation, you are forced to waste energy. And so much of our energy is wasted, like a staggering amount. And it's really sad to see so much energy go to waste. And now you have this tool that you can plug in these computers and be able to take that wasted energy, otherwise wasted energy, and turn it into sound money with an absolutely fixed supply that you can send to anyone, anywhere in the world without needing to ask for permission. And that is a paradigm shift that I don't even think we can fully grasp, even those of us in the space, grasp what the implications of that are down the road. And I think they're very net positive. It's going to be really interesting to see what countries start realizing this before others. El Salvador has obviously led that charge at the nation state level. Texas, although not a country, perhaps soon its own country, I'm not sure.
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah, but I mean, Texas, I was just looking at this EIA study that it's a partial study that came out today, the Energy Information Association or agency, one of these other many government agencies in the U.S., and they're requesting emergency data collection on the Bitcoin mining industry for forward-looking. They have some of the backwards-facing data. But one of the things that they talked about in this initial kind of overview of the industry, they talked about very Bitcoiner talking points. They had actually had some decent research in there. They talked about proof of work versus proof of stake, and look how much more efficient proof of stake is. Okay. But then they pointed out that Bitcoin miners seek out the cheapest forms of electricity. That electricity is often coming from stranded power sources that are not utilized, from renewable sources that are way underutilized, from direct connections to power producers that are enabling them to not need to go through the grid, but to just go direct from the source. And they talked about load balancing. They talked about ERCOT. And it's pretty cool. Again, it's one of those things where you see that Overton window shifting where, not everyone in government is stupid, right? A lot of them are parasitic bureaucrats, but there are people in there, I think many, who genuinely, at different levels, and probably especially the state and local level more so, want what's best for themselves and also what's best for the people they represent. And it's going to be very interesting to see how these government-based narratives shift towards saying, you know what? Look at all of this energy we're wasting as a state, as a country, as a company. Why are we not turning this wasted energy into money? Why are we not doing that? And as long as you have access to halfway decent information, those questions should come pretty easily, and the answer should come pretty easily as well, which is, well, there's no reason not to. We are literally burning money and leaving it on the table, and we could be turning it into absolutely scarce sound money. So let's get on it. And I'm curious a little bit of your take on, Texas is basically winning the hash wars in America at this point. You've got massive facilities with multiple companies. The state, it seems, has been extremely pro-Bitcoin. You've got the whole ERCOT relationship, which is fantastic. Do you see this start to become a battle between states to a certain extent, and I'm not talking about full civil war here. From a hash war perspective, it seems like it's in states' best interest, right?
I really hope so. I mean, I think ERCOT gets a lot of negative press for a few times a year. If it's like freezing or extra hot and the prices change a lot. But if you look past the headlines, like if you do a little bit of research, Texas energy is like 25 to 30% cheaper than any other state. So yeah, there's like a couple days where maybe they don't get the demand quite right and the price goes nuts. But over an entire year, you're spending a lot less. And Bitcoin mining is going to drive that cost even lower. And when energy is abundant, that's where prosperity happens. If we can harness energy at the lowest cost and just have an excess of energy, and Bitcoin mining helps us get there, like that drives a lot more prosperity. So yes, I'm really hoping that other states look into Bitcoin mining just because they have to, right? I think one of the funniest things about Bitcoin mining is it's literally monetizing landfills, right? Landfills emit methane gas, which can be burned and turned into money. And like there's no downside other than just sheer ignorance or malice not to turn vented methane from a landfill into additional wealth. You want that methane?
It's insane. Like It sounds like magic. It sounds too good to be true. And the reality is that like when it comes to vented landfill methane, which I think is one of the most just beautiful examples of Bitcoin miners getting creative and also solving real problems, which is tons of landfills emitting tons of methane. Like there is no one else who is going to pay to take care of that problem.
Nobody else.
The best thing that might happen is they've got to vent that methane somehow. So maybe somebody pays through some sort of a grant or subsidy to vent it and burn it, and to just burn that methane in the atmosphere. That's the best case scenario, because those landfills aren't hooked up to the grid. You're not going to be able to power the grid with that. Nobody's going to pay for that. But Bitcoin miners will, because they're generating revenue from day one. That's exactly it's one of these things, again, it's like you look at it and you're like, in retrospect, you're like, well, that's a no-brainer. But for a lot of people, that is still a bridge too far for them, apparently. Well, I don't know.
There's still that narrative that Bitcoin is bad for the environment because it uses energy. But if you look closely into really any facet of Bitcoin, I legitimately don't believe that there's anything better for the environment than moving the entire world onto sound money, because it incentivizes saving and it incentivizes capturing all the wasted energy that we already waste, right? It's monetizing it. Once you have Bitcoin, you make smarter decisions about your purchases. You're not going to go out and spend frivolously. Every purchase is painful, which is a blessing and a curse, to be honest. Sometimes I'm like, I got to just buy something. I'm going to have to use some Bitcoin, but I have to really get myself into a mindset where I can say goodbye to precious sats. And that alone is probably the most transformative environmentally positive thing that we could do for the world. It's like, just put up a little extra friction on just frivolously spending, overconsumption, and just see what'll happen there.
For one thing, the landfills would be a lot less full of useless shit if we decrease some of that consumption. So I guess that would actually lead to less methane produced by the landfills, but I think we can live with that. The Bitcoin miners mining vented methane will still have plenty of landfills to tap.
And that's another thing about Bitcoin miners. You could just move them.
Yeah.
Hey, this landfill has stopped venting methane. Let's go bring our miners somewhere else and plug them in over there to the new wind farm or the new hydro dam that we've just purchased.
It's this beautiful cheat code across so many layers of society and also across one's personal life, I think, where answers become much more obvious and clear and simple thanks to the incentives of Bitcoin. And then you start to realize that, you know, the broken money that we have, to steal Lynn Alden's book name, which is a great read, but this broken money has led to a broken incentive structure. And because we have that broken incentive structure, it trickles down to every aspect of our societies, of our economies, of our governments. And you see all of these problems that one faction or another likes to pick at and say, this is the biggest problem that we face today. And in reality, all of these problems, while they may be issues, they're actually just symptoms of a deeper disease, right? They're symptoms of the broken money, which has broken our incentives. And you can try to fix those problems. It's like treating the symptoms versus curing the disease. Treating the symptoms usually involves government subsidies and shoveling money into one department or another to try and appease a group of voters to get you reelected under the guise of, hey, we're fixing this problem. But you're never fixing the problem. You're putting a Band-Aid on it. And curing the disease is fixing the money. And it's that, you know, the often repeated cliche of fix the money, fix the world. But it's really not a cliche, because fixing the money involves fixing the incentives. And incentives are everything. Again, it's why do people do what they do? Why? Because the incentives are aligned in such a way that decision makes the most personal sense for them. So you're not going to change their behavior unless you change the incentives. And Bitcoin is the best way to change incentives in a positive way that I have personally seen in my short years on this earth. And I think that's true for just about every Bitcoiner. And that's what also makes it why it's always exciting to be at Bitcoin events, to be in person with Bitcoiners, because there's so much doom and gloom in so much of the world. But when you're around Bitcoiners, you feel so much hope, because people are actually building things and trying to make the world better. And yes, also trying to make a profit off of that, which is great, because that means they're going to deliver the best possible product, service, experience, because that's what the market demands. And it's cool to see that parallel society, that parallel system evolving.
That's you mentioned something that was really interesting there, and I think another thing that I've been thinking about, and another way that I've seen the industry moving, is now Bitcoin companies are going to need to figure out ways to create products that Bitcoiners will pay Bitcoin for. We've gone from, you know, I think we're starting to move beyond just the exchange, the Bitcoin accumulation phase into, okay, now we have some wealthy Bitcoiners. What are the products and services that they demand that they will spend Bitcoin on? And if your company doesn't have a product that you personally would pay Bitcoin for, or that, you know, makes sense to spend Bitcoin on, I think that's a huge problem. And it's something that companies are going to have to figure out. It's something that I personally think about a lot at Unchained, and try to find different ways to deliver value and think of products that I would spend Bitcoin on.
I do actually want to ask you about Unchained. Now, you guys are not a sponsor of another fucking Bitcoin podcast, but I think that the service that you offer is really fantastic. And the reason that I like what you guys do is because one of the biggest hurdles that I've seen people come up against when they first are getting into Bitcoin, or if I'm talking about Bitcoin, especially honestly folks that maybe have a little bit more capital, are a little bit older, are looking at putting a sizable chunk of their wealth into Bitcoin, is you start explaining things to them, and maybe they're coming along, they're like, okay, yeah, I'm down with this. This sounds great. And then you get to the point where the conversation gets to, okay, and this is your private key, and you got to make sure you keep this really safe, because if you lose this, you can't, you're screwed. And it's that reaction of, you mean there's no customer service I can talk to? There's no 1-800 number that I can ring up and be able to get my Bitcoin sent back to me? The bank will reverse the transaction for me. And you're like, well, that's actually kind of the point, is that there's no middle. And then you get into all that. But that's a big roadblock for people, is that fear of, I'm going to screw something up. And so, maybe you have probably personally onboarded, I'm guessing, like hundreds, thousands of folks onto Bitcoin, like had those conversations time and time again. What are your big takeaways from that? And how does that kind of influence the way you guys think about your product offerings at Unchained? And also how you view, I guess, your place in the ecosystem as driving forward that Bitcoin adoption?
Yeah, we think a lot about those things. So that we have an entire team at Unchained, the concierge team, which their number one goal, their entire purpose is to get people set up and comfortable controlling keys. And one of the biggest hesitations that we've seen is just that fear of making mistakes. And at a deeper level, it's a problem of single signature Bitcoin wallets have a single point of failure, which in my view is the most important thing about multi-sig, is that there are now no longer single points of failure. So we really help folks achieve that peace of mind where they're actually controlling keys to Bitcoin, but they know that if they make a mistake, they're not going to lose Bitcoin. And that is the kind of fear that people have about taking self-custody. And then from there, so we get people onboarded onto the most secure form of Bitcoin custody, which is multi-sig, where keys are distributed, collaborative custody. Unchained controls one key, clients control two. They have a majority of the keys. From that foundation, we can then offer financial products and services that make sense. So retirement products, Bitcoin IRA, so you can have a tax advantage Bitcoin account where you control keys. Inheritance, so for people who are thinking about Bitcoin generationally, we help you to basically package up the required information in a way that somebody who has no clue about Bitcoin can follow, and basically hop on the phone, give us a call, and then we can walk them through. And so those are the types of things that we're trying to flesh out, is just the financial services beyond custody, but it's built on that foundation of collaborative custody where keys are distributed, so there isn't a single company or individual that could possibly lose Bitcoin because keys are distributed.
Yeah, and I think it's just it's a remarkable thing that we have the ability to do multi-sig. Like that is so genuinely huge, and whether it's however many keys you want, total with it, if it's a 2 or 3 or 3 or 5 or whatever, that's, I think, a lot more peace of mind. And again, I firmly believe that, like, a lot of orange pilling happens, person to person, from a conversation, from, finally you told them about Bitcoin again for the 50th or the 69th time, and they finally said, okay, yeah, I'll get a little bit of Bitcoin on Coinbase or whatever. But I honestly think that what helps drive adoption, a huge part of adoption, is companies that offer services that address the pain points of people trying to use Bitcoin. Like that, and companies in the Bitcoin space who are created by and run by Bitcoiners know those problems all too well. And they are best positioned to be able to offer solutions for that. And again, to compete, to provide the best product, to provide the best service, to provide the best experience. And ultimately, all that competition is for the benefit of the users. Like that is great. We need more Bitcoin companies, as many as possible, coming up with problem or solutions to problems that Bitcoiners face. And it's really cool to see that Bitcoin company ecosystem evolve. I was talking
Absolutely, yeah.
I was talking to Mike Yarmaz, the Muzzman, back in December. And, I asked him, what do you say to the people who say that there's nothing happening on Bitcoin? Again, kind of a crypto side of the aisle trope, all the innovations happening in the blockchain Web3 space. And he's like, what do you mean nothing's happening on Bitcoin? Everything's happening on Bitcoin. Like, that is where you actually see real companies building real products, building real services to address real needs. And to see that ecosystem evolve, and I think with the ETFs, as we see more and more institutional capital starting to focus on Bitcoin, we'll also see more and more institutional capital focus on Bitcoin companies. And, because that's, again, potential. Maybe the company isn't going to outperform Bitcoin, but maybe they do over a certain time frame, and you're willing to take that bet. Like, that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah. What I've really noticed is that if you're solving problems for Bitcoiners, a single Bitcoiner, what you're actually solving problems that massive companies that eventually adopt Bitcoin are going to face. So even with these ETFs, for example, something like 11 out of 13 of them are relying on Coinbase. That is a massive single point of failure. If one company runs into an issue, 11 ETFs are going to have problems simultaneously. That's not sustainable. It's the same problem as an individual who's like, I have my life savings and I'm securing it with one ledger key. It's just not sustainable. You really need redundancy, and you need to eliminate the possibility of a single mistake from causing you to lose money.
I wanted to ask you about the ETF specifically, because I think you had a tweet. Was it Bitwise who posted? They were the first ones to post their address, and it's well, you can speak to this more intelligently than I can, but it's an old format, first of all, and it's single sig. And can you talk about that a little bit? I think you had multiple tweets about this, because it was cool that they were like, here, look, you can see our address, and people are sending 69 sats to it and whatnot. And yay, they've got overcapitalized now. But talk about what the potential pitfalls of that are for, I think it was Bitwise, right?
Yeah, and I do want to give them a ton of credit. Out of all of the ETFs, I think they are the one that appears to me like they are trying to be Bitcoin focused and engage with the Bitcoin ethos and community. So they're donating to Brink. They publish their address. Mm-hmm. What I think a lot of Bitcoiners were looking at is the type of address they used is a pay to pub key hash address. And that was a very, very early address, single signature, very secure. But now there's kind of multiple new address types that have been invented since then, such as multisig, pay to script hash, or SegWit, or Taproot. Those are all different address types that have been invented since the pay to pub key hash. The reason that they're using that is because that's what their custodian uses, Coinbase. And I'm certain Coinbase has extreme security around the single key that secures that address. They probably split up that key in some sort of MPC or Shamir sharing method. So it's kind of like multisig, but the problem with it is that at the end of the day, it's one key. And when you sign transactions, or when you create those little kind of shards of that key, there's a moment in time where it is a single key protecting all that Bitcoin. So I want to give them a lot of credit. They're being very transparent. They're going out there and they're publishing their address. I just as a joke, I looked up the largest Bitcoin address and published that address as well and said, this is my address. The problem with publishing an address is all of the addresses are public, and you can go and look them up on the blockchain on mempool.space or blockstream.info. You can look up every single address, and that's what I did. I went and found the biggest address. In order to really prove that an address is your address, what you actually need to do is use a key to sign a message from that address. So it's almost exactly what's happening with Craig Wright right now. Craig Wright says, I'm Satoshi, those are my addresses. Look, I've shown you the addresses, they're mine. And an extremely simple way to just prove that you actually have those addresses to use your hardware wallet to sign a message. It's like trivially easy. It takes 15 seconds with Trezor Suite, for example. So one of the things that I said to the Bitwise Suite was like, how can I verify that that's your address? Can you sign a message? So, of course, Bitcoiners are always going to try to find the most esoteric ways to prove their kind of knowledge. And on one hand, it's like, welcome to the show. You're here. Like, we're glad. I think, personally, I'm glad that they're here. I'm glad that they have been a prominent voice for, Open Sats and Brink. And of course, we're going to do a little dunking. Welcome to the show. So exactly. There's essentially, with that address type, there's a ceiling that you hit, which is ultimately at the end of the day, it's a single key. And if you move to a different type of address, there's just another ceiling that you can get to, which is that even if you hack that one key, you still need more keys before you can spend the Bitcoin.
I appreciate the explanation, and I definitely agree. Like, I think what Bitwise is doing, they're donating 10% of net profits to open source development. That's awesome. Like,
I would love to see all of the ETFs doing that.
Yeah.
And I'll happily dunk on the other ETFs as well.
Yes. Let's see what BlackRock does.
Yeah, exactly.
The rest will follow. But for now, good on Bitwise for doing that, because that's an actual predictable or relatively predictable revenue inflow for open source development, which could become quite substantial. So that's really cool. I'm glad to see it.
And I think it's one thing to just say that you're going to donate 10%, but it's also cool to see that I think they're right now the third largest ETF, maybe after GBTC. So it's like BlackRock, Fidelity, and then them. So if you have an active 401k or something like that, and you want exposure to Bitcoin, there's a few good options out there now. But if you have an IRA, that's when you should hold your keys.
And it's optionality is a beautiful thing, isn't it?
It is.
And I hope that, with the ETFs in a larger sense, like, I think we're going to see a lot of people who end up buying a Bitcoin ETF, maybe just for the heck of it, because they heard Bitcoin's going to go up. And then maybe that encourages them to go down that rabbit hole a little bit. And we see a little bit more of that. But time will tell. But Phil, I do want to be conscious, like Bitcoin, your time is scarce. So want to be conscious of that, and I appreciate you coming on today. The last thing I would ask you is that, are you reading anything right now that you'd recommend?
I just finished reading the Three Body Problem trilogy, which is a sci-fi trilogy. There's a Netflix show that's coming out, and it really, the first two books, The Three Body Problem and The Dark Forest, were, I thought, incredible. They're slow burns. So it takes about 100, 150 pages for each of them to start getting really good. But I thought those books were absolutely incredible. It got me thinking about our place in the universe just a little bit differently.
Nice. I did see that pop up on Netflix, so I'll have to check out the book as well.
The third book, I would say, kind of jumps the shark a little bit, but it's also pretty good. The first two, though, I think are incredible. Okay.
Well, and then the last thing is, I'll include like your social links, anywhere else you would like to send people who are listening to the show.
Yeah, you can find me on X at Phil_Geiger. My email is phil@unchained.com. You're welcome to shoot me an email. And yeah, follow me on X or connect with me via email.
All right. Well, man, thank you so much for coming on again. Bitcoin is scarce, but Bitcoin podcasts are also abundant. So thank you for sharing your scarce time on another fucking Bitcoin podcast.
Had a fucking great time.
I had a great time too. Let's do it again sometime, huh?
Absolutely. Thanks, Walker.
All right. Thanks, man. And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net or hit me up on social media. On Nostr, head to primal.net/Walker. And on Twitter, search for @WalkerAmerica or @TitcoinPodcast. You can also watch the video version of this show on X or on YouTube by going to youtube.com/@WalkerAmerica or Rumble by searching for @WalkerAmerica. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million. But Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to another fucking Bitcoin podcast. Until next time, stay free.